Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. Joined by Seth Wilson, I'm Thomas Vick, your co-host of this podcast. Today, we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how to start your law practice. And Seth, you kind of came up with this idea, and so I'll kind of let you introduce kind of your thinking and talking about this topic today.
Thanks, Thomas. It is a natural fit, I think, for me to ask you questions since when I came out of law school, I ended up in a firm in Indianapolis and never had the opportunity or didn't know that I ever wanted to, honestly, hang my own shingle, so to speak. And so you have that first-hand experience. I thought it might be fun to kind of go down memory lane a little bit and talk through how you got started. Last week, we talked about some of the ideas and kind of getting over maybe that initial, do I do this? Do I not do this? So if you've made the decision you want to do this, let's start figuring out what are the next steps to take. So Thomas, when you first started your thought process of becoming a solo lawyer, tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I think we could probably get started around, October 20th when I first became licensed to practice law. You're sworn in, and your family goes to the swearing in ceremony with, hundreds of other attorneys, depending on what state you're in. And, I certainly had been thinking about what was going to transpire after that, but that's really the starting point, and really allows you to make the connections and to have the conversations that you need to have to set yourself up for later success. So, one of the first things that I knew that I needed to do is to get malpractice insurance. That was the first thing, before you even try to get a client. It's really critical that you get that malpractice insurance policy in place, and that it is backdated to the day that you became an attorney. So for me, that was October 6th, 2014. So that's my starting point. And every other malpractice insurance policy that I have purchased has been backdated for that date, October 6th, 2014. Really important, and it's important for obvious reasons. So you are a young attorney when you first become barred, maybe not in years, but in experience, you're a young attorney. And so there's definitely a possibility that you're going to make some mistakes. And in order to kind of confidently go out and say, I'm gonna do the deep dive, and I'm gonna go and start my own law practice, you want to have at least that assurance that if I mess something up, I'm going to have some insurance coverage to support me, and I'm still going to be able to make progress in my law practice. So that's kind of the starting point, I would say. It's kind of the first official act. The president, when he's inaugurated, what's the first official act that he's going to do at the Oval Office? Well, that was kind of my first official act as an attorney, was to get malpractice insurance and get that into place. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into just applying for malpractice insurance. It was really difficult for me to fill out those applications because I didn't know where my clients were going to come from. I knew that I wanted to have an estate planning practice, but that didn't necessarily mean I was going to only take wills and trusts and estate administration. So I didn't know exactly where I was going to get started. For example, one of my first clients was a child custody, child support issue, and I think I've only done one or two of those in my lifetime. You just don't know where those are going to come from, and you know that you're going to be open to anybody that will pay you to do legal services. So, filling out what areas of practice, what percentage is going to be estate planning, what percentage of your practice will be, personal injury, workers' compensation, all these different other areas. Maritime law is on there. It's pretty difficult. And so it was kind of comforting for me to hear the insurance agent say, just give it your best guess. Don't get too hung up on it. They just want to have a general idea. And so you fill that out, submit it. And, one of the encouraging things about applying for that is the cost of malpractice insurance. The it's kind of tiered in a way that the younger attorneys who are early on in their practice, they don't have as much in the way of premiums to pay in order to obtain a good amount of coverage. I would say you probably need to have, $250,000, maybe up to $1 million worth of coverage in order to get started, depending on the kind of practice that you're going to be in. I think what I ended up having to do as I'm thinking about this, I think I got maybe $250,000 worth of coverage. But then in order to get enrolled with the Indianapolis Bar Association's lawyer referral service line, I had to up that coverage to about $1 million. That was a big deal for me because it was like I got to triple or quadruple my coverage, but that the good thing was it was still relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things. What I was paying then is not nearly what I'm paying now in malpractice insurance coverage, and it really gives you the confidence to know I can try this and do my very best. I'm going to do my due diligence, but understand I'm human, and so I'm prone to errors from time to time. I can go forth and serve clients to the best of my ability.
And it's so helpful, as you mentioned, to have that agent alongside. And maybe even in a future episode, we'll have someone on as a guest to kind of walk through the nuts and bolts of all of that to understand, again, the various elements of the application and what the insurance company underwriters are looking at and looking for. But it's sort of that seal of approval that you get once you're approved to go, wow, I'm in business, so to speak. And so did you then at that time, how did you structure the firm itself? Was that incorporated? Was it a partnership? How did you handle that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, so I did not incorporate immediately. I decided that I would operate as a sole proprietorship, doing business as the law office of Thomas A. Vick. And so you go to the bank, you establish an account, you don't have to do anything too complicated. You just have to declare yourself, okay, I'm, the law office of Thomas A. Vick at this point in time. And we practice in the state of Indiana, and there are regulations about registering a law practice if you're going to operate as a corporation. My current practice is registered as a professional corporation. And making that decision, I believe I had a conversation with somebody from the Board of Law Examiners, and they kind of indicated that it would maybe be simpler for me to not worry about the incorporation status and just go forward with the sole proprietorship and operate that way. I think I was prepared to do the corporation, but I was guided in a different direction, and that made things a lot simpler. So you just open up a bank account, and I think you need to have some kind of accounting software. QuickBooks was a great option for me, and get the banking established. And then we've talked about Clio a lot of times on here. In that child support case that I got, I wanted to have some kind of retainer. So I was able to put that into my client trust account immediately and have that security for the work that I was going to do for that client. So, opening up that operating account, but also opening up the trust account, those were the two steps that needed to take place. And I know that we wanted to talk a little bit about that IOLTA account.
Yeah, so when you open up that bank account, that becomes your operating account. And if you're going to take client funds, depending on how you set up your arrangement with that client, and you will need a fee agreement, you may also need a trust account or an IOLTA account. And it's really important, I think, to work with a bank that has familiarity with those accounts and can help guide you through that process. They will have authorization from the Indiana Bar Foundation in terms of working with and being authorized by the foundation. Because essentially what happens on those accounts is they may earn interest, such as it is on the amount you're holding in trust for your clients. And there's some rules associated with how much money you can hold for a client in an IOLTA account versus potentially opening up a segmented account for that client. And so you have to be aware of how that works. And I know there's some resources available on the Indiana State Bar Association's Law Practice Management Committee page. And then the Bar Foundation itself has quite a bit of resource on IOLTA accounts. And so read through some of those materials and determine which may apply to you in your scenario. Obviously, this is limited to Indiana, but other states have similar programs, and determine how best to do that. But I think your point about having some type of accounting software is absolutely critical for that, because you have to track those trust accounts very, very closely. And Clio has some really good resources on how to maintain adequate trust account records and industry standard for how you track and balance those and reconcile those accounts on a monthly basis. Make sure, obviously, when you're holding funds for someone else in trust, that is a very important duty, and you want to make sure that those funds are handled appropriately and in compliance with your obligations as an attorney.
And for me, it's always been as simple as I need to know to the very penny how much is in that IOLTA account at all times. There can never be a single day where I don't know what is in that IOLTA account. So you've got to, for me, I didn't always, go through all the bookkeeping for QuickBooks for my operating account, but I always made sure that IOLTA account bookkeeping was up to date. So I knew exactly how much was in there, make sure that QuickBooks is lining up with the amount that you have in Clio. And, if you've written a check and it hasn't cleared yet, you understand why there's some kind of mismatch there. Really, really important to keep track of that. I remember when I was establishing that IOLTA account at the bank, it was a little bit different for the bank rep to put together. I think I sat there for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And, he said a few choice words, from the time that I started to the time that I finished, because it was a little bit hard for him to figure out what kind of account this needed to be, despite him telling me that he had just done one of those, a couple weeks prior. So patience was necessary, I would say, when you're trying to establish the IOLTA account. It's not something that a bank representative does on an everyday basis. So, but I remember I went in there armed with, all the paperwork from, it might have been from the State Bar Association, or it might have been just the rules about the IOLTA account from the rules of professional conduct here in Indiana. I think that's probably what it was, to explain to the bank what I needed to get done. So just go into it prepared with all the documentation that you need.
Yeah. And you're ultimately responsible for that as the attorney. It's not really the bank's responsibility. However, what I think we're demonstrating through this conversation is, even though you are a solo lawyer, so to speak, it does take a team of people and software and tools and things to help you manage that practice and get it off the ground. You haven't even represented your first client yet. You're just getting prepared to do that. And that's, I think, a factor to consider as you're weighing the options of, do I join a firm or do I go alone and start this thing and hang my shingle? What tilted the scale for you in favor of, I think I want to give this a shot?
Well, I think we've discussed this a little bit in past episodes, but for me, it was a matter of, I can spend all my time filling out these applications and submitting resumes. And I was coming into practice first year 2014 to 2015, and the legal industry in Indiana and probably around the country was still reeling from the 2008 crisis. Law firms weren't really hiring very much at that time. And so I figured, while I would be doing this application submission work, I could be doing the same amount of work, but with the idea of getting my foundation set for my own law practice. And years down the road, it would become a better result for me than working for the man, so to speak. So that's what my thought process was. I wanted to set myself up. My living situation was such that I could go for it without much risk. So I moved back home with my parents and I just got started and got to work. I had a great opportunity where I had the chance to go for it. And not everybody has that opportunity. You might go to law school like you did, Seth, and you were married in law school. And so you had to make sure that you put food on the table as soon as you got out of law school. I had the ability, a longer runway before I needed to, take off. But that was one thought that I had was I'll be in a better position. I'll use my time wisely, and later on I'll benefit from the work that I've put into it. I go back to a book that I read in law school, How to Start and Build a Law Practice, and I remember in that book it said something like you're going to lose money the first year. You might break even second and third year. Fourth year, you might make some money. Fifth year, you'll make a little bit more money. But by year 6, 7, 8, you're going to be in a better position than you would have been had you gotten an associate position right out of law school. That always stuck with me when I read that in my third year law office management class. I think it has rung fairly true for me. It was a little bit longer than that, but if you stick with it, eventually, you're going to get a steady flow of clients, and it's going to be very much worth your while. So, kind of looking to the future, what would be the better situation, working for somebody or working in your own law practice? I chose working in my own law practice. And then just the types of cases that I want to work on. I didn't want to be doing divorces. I didn't want to be doing child custody or really even personal injury cases. I wanted to be able to choose the kind of cases that I wanted to take on. That was a significant factor for me, and just, I'm a Christian, and so I wanted to be sure that I had the ability to advise clients, counsel clients in a way that shows fidelity to my faith and in accordance with my conscience. Because you got the counselor hat, and you've got the the legal hat that you got to wear. And sometimes your legal advice isn't always the counselor advice that you'll give clients. So I wanted to be able to have that discretion within my own law practice to serve in that manner. So those were some of the reasons why I chose to go that direction.
Yeah, and what a great list to help frame that decision-making concept, because there are a lot of competing concerns and there's a lot of competing options available as well. And I know from our time together, you weren't 100% practicing law even when you started, and you were sort of supplementing the income and those kind of things, doing other work as well. And so I think the encouragement I would give to those who are thinking about this journey is, if you can get started, and this is a side hustle to use today's terms, and you keep another job somewhere else, whatever that is, you start at some point to hit a point of, okay, I'm busy enough now in my law practice that I can let these other things go, and it becomes my full-time thing. And that's a good thing. And it's okay if it's not there right away, because sticking with it, being consistent day over day, week over week, month over month, and year over year is what it takes to build a successful law firm. And success has different meanings. Financial success is a metric, but also kind of that lifestyle idea of, this supports my family, it supports my faith and my convictions, it supports my ability to serve. I don't have to worry about the bureaucracy of a larger organization or something like that. I'm more flexible. So many different ways to measure success in what you're doing, and ultimately that is measured by clients being appreciative of your services and telling other people about you, right? That's the highest compliment any one of us can receive, is getting a referral from an existing client or a colleague.
Yeah. For me, I definitely supplemented the law practice for, I would say, several years before I was able to, take flight on my own and, not be dependent upon any other kind of stream of income, whether that was working at H&R Block because I had a little bit of tax experience from law school, or it might have been helping out another law firm with some of their consultations. It might have been teaching tax classes for H&R Block, or doing a document review for ongoing kind of big level discovery projects that needed to be done. I think those have probably gone to the wayside with because we were probably just we were just clicking and looking for the right words, and I think AI probably can do a lot of that right now. But that type of work where you're in a professional environment, it's kind of helping you to have a perspective on your law practice would be really beneficial. And I so do what you have to do to keep the lights on, keep food on the table. But the minute that you have an opportunity to pivot and move to law practice only as your form of income, you gotta hop at that. The same thing with the type of cases that you take on. For me, estate planning is where I've always been, but it's not what I've always done. I've done some public defender work, and the minute that I was able to get off of those public defender contracts, I did so. And the wonderful thing about that is you've got more time to deal with the cases that you want to deal with. And so just be observant of where you are in your law practice, and take opportunities to pivot to where you really want to go.
Thomas, that brought to mind, I didn't even think about this before, but by you getting to a different level of your practice and doing what you want to do, you actually created opportunity for another lawyer or another firm who was looking to do more public defender work. And that contract became available, to someone who may be in a different station of life or along their, pathway. And so it's kind of a neat cycle for how that will work. There is nothing wrong with any of those avenues of work, but they weren't completely aligned with what type of practice area you wanted to focus on in the future. But they helped you get to that point and created that opportunity, and they'll do that for somebody else, which is pretty awesome. So many ways to accomplish it. I think our admonition is always, take the next step, get started, get rolling on things. And the sooner you get started, the sooner you can start to build those reps in, build your confidence, make enough mistakes so you can learn to navigate the various areas and aspects of the law firm.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Do your research, have a reason for what you're doing. Look at the statutes, look at the cases, have a justifiable reason for why you're advising the client the way that you are. But at the end of the day, understand you're not always going to get it right. So give yourself grace, and just think positively throughout it. You got to have a conviction that you're going to get it figured out one day, and the mistakes you made today are not going to happen the next time. You're going to make the corrections. Just don't be too hard on yourself, and just keep pushing through.
Yeah. I always tell younger lawyers, one of the things I committed to early on in my practice is, if I have good news, I give it to the client. If I have bad news, I give it to the client right away. And it doesn't matter. The news does not get better with age. And so if it's a bad result and you're afraid that you might have done something wrong or what have you, don't second guess what you've done. Like you said, you've got a principled reason for the activity and the plan that you did, but tell the client right away, communicate with them, and just let them know, hey, it wasn't the result we were hoping for. And obviously the good news is easy. We're excited to share that, but the same principle is probably even more important on the bad news side. So if you did do something wrong, maybe get some advice before you go down that road. But,
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you got to trust your judgment as a lawyer and say, hey, we tried this thing. This was the plan, and it didn't work out. Now, that's why lawyers never win or lose. We just practice, right?
Right. That's right. Well, Seth, thanks so much for letting me kind of take a walk down memory lane with the very early days of my law practice. And hopefully that's beneficial to the people that are watching or listening to this episode of the podcast. I draw strength and inspiration from those that have been there, done that. And so hopefully other people can kind of see that it's possible from the things that we talk about here on the podcast.
Yeah, and Thomas, that brings to mind, we've just had a lot of news recently in the Indiana bar where longtime Indiana lawyers have passed on recently. And so, our hearts, thoughts, and prayers go out to the families of those affected for sure. Just a sobering reminder of how fleeting life can be and how much impact those lawyers had on us in various ways as we were growing up through the profession. And now, hopefully, we can give some of that back to those who are coming along behind us as well. And you read the accolades and the memories that those folks have left behind, and the impact of their legacy is really astounding. And so look at that in your own life and say, boy, I hope somebody will write something like that about me someday.
That's right. What did Ben Franklin say? You need to either, to have a life that's remembered, you need to live one that's worthy to be written about, or write something that somebody's worthy, wanting to read, something like that. So hopefully that can be true of this podcast. It can help somebody out down the road.
That's right. Speaking of, that's why we named it the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast, because you want to do something that's meaningful and impactful and leave that legacy. And so we hope this is helpful to folks along their journey to launching their law firm. Thomas, thanks so much for the time today, and we will catch you on the next one.
Thanks, Seth.